Let's look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! The Detroit Lions are gearing up for a playoff run, but in order to do that, they're going to have to make some roster spots. They're going to have to make some changes on the roster, and they're going to have to change this roster significantly for the 2024 playoff run that they want to have. And today, we are seeing the first steps of that plan. A couple of days ago, head coach Dan Campbell mentioned the fact that the Detroit Lions, despite having clinched the NFC North division a couple of weeks ago, are going to play a majority of their starters versus Minnesota, meaning that starting quarterback Jared Goff is likely to play, starting wide receivers Amon-Ra St. Brown are going to play, Sam Laporte is going to play. All the offensive linemen are likely to at least start the game and play some portion of it in order to secure themselves the 12th win of the 2023 NFL season. The Lions want that 12th win despite being essentially locked into the 3 seed at this point, and they are going to do everything in their power to make that 12th win a reality. However, they also have their eyes set on future goals. They have their eyes set on 2 weeks from now when the NFC wildcard comes around. They have their eyes set on 3 weeks from now when the NFC divisional round comes around. And they have their eyes set on a couple of weeks and a month from now for the NFC Championship and potentially a Super Bowl. They are potentially and looking to prepare for a deep playoff run. And in order to do that, they are looking to welcome back not one, but multiple different stars on the defense. And unfortunately for them, the roster is going to have to change. The process started this morning as the Detroit Lions decided to announce that Isaiah Buggs, starting defensive tackle over the last 3 games, will officially be waived by the Detroit Lions. Isaiah Buggs put out something this morning saying that his time in Detroit is over, that he loved the time that he spent here, but unfortunately that time is coming to an end. And a couple minutes later, Tom Pelissero officially reported that the Detroit Lions have waived veteran defensive lineman Isaiah Buggs. He also added that Coach Campbell said that defensive tackle Alim McNeill could be back from IR this week, and this would be making room for that particular move. Now, Isaiah Buggs has been a big part on the Lions defensive line. He's played 27 games over the last 2 years for Detroit, totaling 58 tackles from the defensive tackle position, 2 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 12 total quarterback hits, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery, and 3 passes defended. He was one of the better players in the Lions' subpar defense 2 years ago, and he was a fan favorite. He was a player that a lot of people really liked. He was a player that a lot of people wanted to get more playing time this year. And unfortunately, after an offseason where there was very clearly a rift and a divide between the head coach and the offensive and the defensive coordinator and Isaiah Buggs himself, they ended up putting him as a healthy scratch for the first game in Kansas City, putting him as a healthy scratch for the second game versus Seattle, and having him only play about 50% of the games this year, and a large number of those and a large number of his playing time coming after the potential regular season injury ender of Alim McNeill. Now, the Detroit Lions have hinted that a couple of different players are going to play this week, including, of course, Alim McNeill, which would make sense why Isaiah Buggs was getting cut. But they've also hinted that both Jason Cabinda and CD Deuce could be returning from injuries and make their seasonal debuts, or at least in Jason Cabinda's case, his seasonal debut, and CD Deuce returning for the first time since week 2. Now, the Detroit Lions have not had their free agent acquisition since the second week of the NFL after he tore his pectoral in week 2 versus the Seattle Seahawks. CD Deuce then spent the remainder of the regular season on the injury reserve list, has been in his 21-day window for the last 2 weeks, meaning it is very likely that he is going to see the field and be activated either today, tomorrow, or at some point before the Detroit Lions Week 18 matchup versus the division rival Minnesota Vikings. And despite the fact that Jason Cabinda was waived just a couple of days ago, the Detroit Lions are expected to bring him back to the practice squad in order to probably elevate him to be the starting fullback for the Detroit Lions for Week 18, as well as hopefully a deep playoff run. Now, there have been a lot of roster moves over the last couple of weeks, so I really want to just put into perspective how many spots are actually open, what the Detroit Lions have to do to make room for Alim McNeill and CD Deuce and Jason Cabinda and potentially James Houston going into the playoffs so that everybody is on the same page and everybody knows what's going on. So a couple of days ago, the Detroit Lions decided to cut cornerback Chase Lucas and linebacker Trevor Nowatzki. Chase Lucas was promptly brought back to the Detroit Lions practice squad despite having many other options and places to go. He wanted to come back to the Detroit Lions and join what he had already started and finished the season he has already helped contribute to. However, Trevor Nowatzki was claimed off of waivers and brought onto the Arizona Cardinals 53-man roster. That opened up 2 spots for the Detroit Lions to promptly bring Jason Cabinda off of IR, but they very quickly waived him right after as he became a free agent and went to the waiver wire. Nobody claimed Jason Cabinda off of waivers, meaning the Detroit Lions were free to bring him back to the practice squad. And as of right now, that does seem to be the plan, as Dan Campbell has already talked about getting him snaps in Week 18. The Detroit Lions then went on to sign both Michael Badgley and Anthony Frisker from the practice squad for Michael Badgley to be the new starting kicker, while Anthony Frisker joined as the team's 3rd tight end in the absence of Brock Wright, who has missed the last 2 games with an injury. Now, Brock Wright is getting healthier, and Brock Wright is expected to return fairly soon, meaning I think Anthony Frisker is back on the chopping block, and the Detroit Lions are going to need to cut one more player in order to bring back all the guys that they really want. So here is how I see everything going down. I think Isaiah Buggs, of course, is being cut for Alim McNeill. Without Isaiah Buggs and without Alim McNeill, that defensive line is relatively weak, with your best guys being Josh Pascal and Benito Jones, with your depth being Levi Onwuzurike and 3rd-round pick Broderick Martin. That isn't a great defensive line, and unless you're bringing back a guy like Alim McNeill, it really doesn't make sense for you to cut Isaiah Buggs until Alim is ready to return, meaning I think that Alim will be back this week for the Detroit Lions. I think Anthony Frisker will be cut for CD Deuce. I think that you're going to have your 3 tight ends in Brock Wright, Sam Laporta, and of course, James Mitchell, and you are going to want to leave your 4th tight end off to potentially bring back your best safety, and then they won't actually have to cut anybody for Jason Cabinda, as they will likely just elevate him from the practice squad for the 4 games he is eligible to do so throughout the remainder of the season, as well as the playoffs. So that leaves just one real problem. What do you do, and how do you bring back James Houston, nicknamed the Problem? Number 41 for the Detroit Lions was off to a pretty good start in the 2023 season. Wasn't quite being utilized the way that a lot of people wanted, but was being very productive when he was actually allowed to rush the passer. And although head coach Dan Campbell hasn't really talked about him a whole lot so far, I do think that James Houston will likely be coming back for the playoffs. I don't think he plays this week. I think they're trying to be really, really cautious. They're trying to really make sure he's healthy for a playoff run and he doesn't get hurt. He doesn't come back too early. And unfortunately, after not talking about him a whole week and after mentioning by name both CD Deuce and Alim McNeill and Jason Cabinda, I think the odds that James Houston makes his return to Detroit very, very unlikely. However, when he does return, I do think that the Detroit Lions will either cut Charles Harris or Julian Okwara. Both players have been healthy scratches multiple times this year. Both players have seen their playing time dip significantly, and they're both kind of similar play styles to James Houston. They're both kind of those bendy guys. They don't really have a whole lot of power. They don't necessarily bring the most to the rush defense. They don't really help the run defense a whole lot. I think Julian Okwara is a much more likely candidate to be waived, and again, I think they'll bring him back if possible to the practice squad, but I do think Julian Okwara is likely the guy out. He plays a very similar game to James Houston, doesn't really impact the rushing defense so much. He's kind of that versatile, more outside linebacker-esque player where he's going to rush the passer. You can drop him into coverage. You can do a couple different things with a really good athlete like Julian Okwara or James Houston. But if James Houston's coming back and can do the job better, I do think they will leave Julian Okwara off the roster, potentially putting him up on waivers and potentially losing him to another football team that very much could use the services of a pass rusher such as Julian Okwara. But with all that being said, that is really all I have for you guys today. That is kind of the roster update, kind of the roster speculation of what is going to happen, what is in the process of happening right now, and how the Detroit Lions bring back their defensive stars for a potential playoff run. Isaiah Buggs is officially gone. Alim McNeill, although not officially back, seems very likely to return this week. CD Deuce is potentially getting some playing time this week, as is fullback Jason Cabinda. And now we are just waiting on the official announcements, as well as the official announcement for James Houston to return to the active roster. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Let me know down in the comments below how you feel about these roster moves. How do you want the Detroit Lions to shake up their roster? How do you want the Detroit Lions roster to look going into the 2024 playoffs? And what do you think about the moves that have been made so far? I'd be very curious what you guys have to say. But with all of that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so very much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.